Today at the National Press Club, Regional Australia Institute Chief Executive Officer Liz Ritchie. With demand for workers in regional Australia skyrocketing to record levels, she'll identify some of the biggest gaps in critical roles. Liz Ritchie with today's National Press Club address.
Hello and welcome to the National Press Club of Australia and today's Westpac address coming you from Ngunnawal and Ngambri country. My name is Julie Hare and I'm the Education Editor at the Australian Financial Review and a board member here at the club. Our guest today is Liz Ritchie, Chief Executive Officer of the Regional Australia Institute, to make her address entitled Rebalancing the Nation, Empowering Regional Australia for Growth. Liz Ritchie has been Chief Executive of the RAI since early 2019, before which she was General Manager for Strategy and Partnership. That was only a 6-month gig before being appointed to the top job, so obviously she made a good impression. Interestingly, Liz spent 2.5 years as a Regional General Manager for Westpac in Perth and as the State Director for the highly regarded Committee for Economic Development. Importantly, Liz hails from the country, Deniliquin to be specific, home of the world-famous Denny Ute muster. Now, I've never made it to the muster, but as a girl from Maitland, it's definitely on my bucket list. You can follow the conversation at Press Club Ost or hashtag NPC. Please welcome Liz Ritchie. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Julie. I look forward to hosting you on your trip to the Denny Ute muster. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. What an honour it is to address the National Press Club. I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we meet today, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I would also like to affirm the Regional Australia Institute's support for the Voice to Parliament. I'd also like to acknowledge the National Press Club Board and the CEO, Maurice Riley, the RAI Board and my Chairman, Christian Zara, to the RAI members, and finally to my family and friends, in particular, my parents, Mari and Lloyd Ritchie, who've travelled from Deniliquin to be here today. I am privileged to be the CEO of the Regional Australia Institute. To me, this role is more than a job, it's a calling. I was born and bred in Deniliquin, New South Wales, in the Riverina. My connection to place is strong, and it drives me daily in our important work, empowering our regions to thrive. If we are to realise our regional ambitions, we will need to see a major mindset shift in this country. But we must first understand the current and historical context so that we can truly appreciate the opportunity in front of us. It's a story of shifting our gaze. It's a story of rebalancing the nation. I stand before you at a time of great transition. It's a transition with regional Australia on the front line. We are on the front line of climate change and our energy transition. We are on the front line of the changing face of industry, work and technology. And we're on the front line of inconceivable livability challenges in healthcare, housing and services. Put these issues together and our regions are facing into Australia's poly crisis. Different and disparate shocks interacting so that the whole is even more overwhelming than the sum of its parts. In Treasurer Chalmers' monthly essay, he reflected on the three big crises we've had in the last 15 years. The GFC, the pandemic, and the current economic downturn that is squeezing Australia with high inflation and rising costs of living. Regional Australia has been at the front line of each of these crises. During the GFC, it was the mining boom that helped us lift. During the pandemic, when our cities closed up, our regions stayed open and grew. Now, with the global downturn, people continue to take refuge in our regions in search of a more affordable lifestyle. While every crisis is different, each has exposed the nation's vulnerabilities, and each time it's been the regions who have risen to the challenge. Now Australia is contending with another seismic shift, a societal transformation. The global pandemic allowed us to reflect on our lives and our society, how we work, where we work, and where we live. Demand for regional living is at record highs, but as a country, we are not prepared. Most people assume it was the pandemic that caused the rise of the regions, but this is not true. RAI research revealed a consistent net movement gain from cities to regions between the decade to 2016. Today, migration from capital cities to regions remains 17% higher than pre-COVID levels. According to our Regional Movers Index, powered by Commonwealth Bank data, the greatest movers are coming from Sydney and Melbourne. The largest migration to regions has had a clear coastal theme. Sunshine and Gold Coast, Bundaberg and Fraser Coast, all in the top 5. But there's a new trend emerging inland. Centres like Glen Innes, York, Ballarat and Murray Bridge are growing and evolving. Great coffee, new co-working spaces, first-class sporting facilities and amazing cultural offerings. But some things haven't changed, like Saturday footy, country pubs, award-winning pies, and most of all, a great sense of community. Our latest research continues to show that 1 in 5 Australians are considering a move to the regions. They are motivated by spiralling cost of living pressures, growing congestion, and a desire for more time, more space, and more connection with the community. And it's the millennials with young families who see the greatest potential for career opportunities. A quick calculation of the 1 in 5 tells you that is 3.5 million people, not a small number. If this happens, we will see 13 million people living in regional Australia. This would be half the nation, not the third we see today. The pandemic simply supercharged a dormant desire. Prior to COVID, we didn't feel that we had permission to pursue the regional dream. Our workforce mindset prioritised presenteeism over agnostic locations and outcomes. While we would never have wished a pandemic to turn the tide, there is opportunity in every challenge. While our Treasurer laments the ailing productivity of our country, regional Australia is primed to answer the call. Rebalancing population growth towards regional cities will have valuable net gains to the national economy. Our research shows the greatest potential for productivity uplift exists in our second and third tier cities. Current population forecasts have Sydney and Melbourne tracking to be megacities by 2056, with agglomeration benefits already tapped out. Even a modest increase in the regional population result a series of pinch points have been exposed in our human capital, housing, healthcare, and our education, our soft infrastructure. This is why today I launch the Big Skills Challenge report, a 10-year snapshot of regional job vacancies. A report that blows up the myth that there are no jobs in regional Australia. In fact, the report's headline finding is that job vacancies in regional Australia grew 3 times faster than metro areas. Since the onset of COVID, we have seen more than 100% job growth. Unemployment is lower in regional Australia and has been for the last 2 years, so our capacity is stretched. Perhaps it's not surprising that the number 1 vacancy in regional Australia was medical practitioners and nurses. In December, there were over 6,000 job vacancies. This was half the national total, despite regions having only 1/3 of the population. New South Wales North Coast currently needs 400 people. York Peninsula and Clare Valley experienced a 5-year 480% increase. Wimmera and Western topped all the regions for 5-year growth with 523%. Rounding out the top 4 in demand occupation groups were receptionists, carers and aides, and sales assistants. These 4 groups represent nearly 30% of all vacant roles. And if we could fill them, we could generate $1.2 billion in economic activity. Today, we have over 1,600 childcare roles vacant. Filling these would see nearly 12,000 people back in the workforce. This report provides the evidence for a targeted plan that reskills and fills the jobs of today whilst we plan for tomorrow. So how do we address this? Firstly, we must have a national population plan in this country. We must invest in education and training whilst focusing on growing within. We must consider targeted incentives to fill chronic shortages in a place-based way. We must continue to promote the regions through our Move to More campaign and others. We must focus on housing and livability, and we must tailor our migration system to fill the roles in the regions. Here today, I welcome Anil and Raju, who migrated to Australia from Nepal. They have made their life in Temora and more recently moved to Singleton. They are a success story. They work in their chosen fields of engineering and dentistry. We need more success stories like Anil and Raju. We talk a lot about feeling the jobs and the skills squeeze nationwide. But when we look deeper, like with most issues, regions are at the centre of this crisis. We have a big skills challenge. Now on to housing. What a vexing issue. We pay more attention to housing markets in the cities than in the regions, despite greater changes in the regional markets. From 2020 to 2022, the average house price in regional Australia rose by 42%. For every regional place that saw a 20% price rise, somewhere else saw a 60% increase. This kind of price growth over a short time span brings with it significant change. Change in the nature of people who can afford these places, and change that will have generational impacts. Regional rental markets also tightened earlier and further than metro markets. Today, the majority of vacancy rates are hovering around 1%. This is unacceptable. But housing is just one part of what makes a town livable. And livability in our regions is being challenged on many fronts. 3.7 million Australians live in a childcare desert. 65% of regional kids finish year 12 compared to 75% in our metro cities. And for those who finish, they are less likely to gain post-school qualifications. We have a health system on life support. The further inland you live, the lower your life expectancy and the higher your chance of preventable hospitalisation. So how did we get here? It's my view that the current mental models for economic and decision-making are outdated, entrenched, and not serving us. The current state of regional Australia is a result of generations of geographical bias and misunderstanding. Regional issues have not been prioritised in the minds of those who have the power to change the future. Nor have regional people consistently sat at the table to be part of active and long-term partnerships. Decades of mismatching investment hasn't served regional Australia well. It wasn't until the 1950s, through urbanisation, that we saw our population shift, and in turn, our thinking changed. Cities were seen as the epicentre of the future, and as the Australian psyche shifted, dominated by a metro context. As regional kids, we were encouraged to leave the country because if you were going to make it, you needed to leave. Don't marry a farmer. My farming father mocked me. Marry an engineer. With this new stigma, this new context, the stigma grew. The notion of a division gradually set in to our national discourse. A chasm between city and country, a nation divided. Polarity was forming and not delivering choice and balance, but instead inequality. There can be real power in managing polarity, but only in our ability to hold mutual recognition and respect of each other. This means regions need to recognise the contribution of cities, and cities need to recognise the contribution of regions. It sounds simple, but it isn't. The metro mindset for decision-making needs to shift. Not just to benefit the regions, but to unlock the potential of the whole country. So what do we need to do? We need to shift our gaze. Our regions have been sitting in a policy blind spot. Regional Australia is different and it requires a different response. Policy coordination is important, but there's another deeper challenge. Urban settlements operate at scale. They are thick markets. Improving services is generally a matter of securing money and people from one agency. Regional communities have thin markets, solutions constrained by the interplay between many different agencies. This makes them too hard to fix and too easy to ignore. At the RAI, we look at the light and shade of regional Australia, and we see a huge number of solutions. For example, the York and Mid-North region in South Australia built 102 houses across 11 small communities by brokering partnerships between housing providers, developers, councils and financiers. Allied health services in regions are being strengthened through the creation of a rural generalist pathway, which recognises the breadth of skills and experience that allied professionals offer in rural settings. And regional communities created regional university centres that provide local support for tertiary students. This model is proving so successful that it's now being supported by the Commonwealth and some of the state governments in over 30 locations, improving enrolments and completions. If we are willing to lift our gaze to our regions, we will see solutions emerging. We need to stop dealing with regional issues as a single government department's problem or budget line item. Stop thinking this is a local government's issue to fix by applying for a one-off grant. Since the inception of the RAI, we have worked with over 40 different state and federal ministers holding office in the portfolio of regional development. Fragmented approaches and silos have all contributed to the challenge that we experience today. Regional Australia needs to be treated as a significant part of the population and economy that it is. And most importantly, we must understand that it's in our national interest for our regions to thrive. I hope my message is clear. We need a mindset shift. We need decision makers, our Prime Minister, our Treasurer, our ministers, our premiers, our chairs, our CEOs, and our community leaders to all understand this needs your commitment. So where are we today? After 10 years of research and engagement, it became clear we needed to develop a plan for regional Australia's future. The plan needed to be long-term to allow people to implement long-term thinking. The plan needed to acknowledge many of the issues in regional Australia are interlinked. Today's job crisis is the perfect example. You can't fill the jobs if you don't have the housing, and you can't get the housing without getting the right skills. They're interlinked. It was a momentous day last year when we launched the Regionalisation Ambition 2032, a framework to rebalance the nation. It is a set of 20 targets across 5 key areas: jobs and skills, population, livability, productivity and innovation, and sustainability and resilience. The ambition was co-designed by government, industry and regional people to understand collective effort and action. By working together, we are blowing up the siloed approach that has held regional Australia back. Preparing our regions for the next chapter is a collective responsibility and not something that government at any level should shoulder alone. The federal government recently announced the Regional Investment Framework, which underpinned a commitment for collaboration. They know that they can't do it alone, and this is a great first step. Today's regional Australia is not a story of build it and they will come. They've already come. 1 in 5 want to come, and we need them. All Australians and migrants should have the choice. We need urgent action. I cannot stress enough the need for a national population plan. This plan needs to overlay the jobs and industries of today and tomorrow with geographical locations. This will enable oversight of both hard and, most importantly, soft infrastructure investment. The future belongs to those that plan for it today. Prime Minister Albanese, we commend your vision to ensure no one is left behind and no one is held back. We want to work with you and your government to shift our nation's gaze to see our regions thrive. We cannot delay, we cannot squander this once-in-a-generation opportunity. Australia, it's time to rebalance the nation. Thank you.
Liz, thank you very much. Thank you for your speech. That was great. Now, when you speak about regional Australia, you're talking about basically a classic catch-22, record low unemployment, skill shortages, a housing crisis, infrastructure blockages, people who want to come, but it's problematic. Now, you talk about the need for a national population plan. Could we just get into the weeds a bit and talk about some of the detail that you were thinking about when you talk about a national population plan? What would it entail?
Thank you, Julie. We've seen previous attempts a couple of years ago to have a national population plan, but it really didn't go into the type of detail that we need to see. So thinking about the transition that we're making, thinking about our moving towards net zero, we know that we're going to have to reskill and retrain, and we know that we're going to need many more people to live and take up these employment opportunities in regional Australia. So when we think about what a national population plan would look like, I think we need to be working closely with the Treasury and the population team there, but we also need to be working with Peter Dawkins, who's here today, who heads up Jobs and Skills Australia. And I've spoken to Peter about this already. So what it would do is enable us to think about where do we need the people, firstly, where are we investing in our infrastructure and our new renewable, our new manufacturing sectors? Where will those people live? And then we overlay the social infrastructure, the soft infrastructure that I've been talking about, so that we can get a sense of what Australia is going to look like. We have to be visionary, because right now we're really caught. As I said, we're caught in a pinch point. We hadn't planned for the growth that we've experienced, and that's why today we are really feeling it. Look, if you looked at the housing which we have at the Institute, you know, it was a sleeping giant. It was going to happen at some point, but we were caught short. And so learning from that, and we must learn from this experience, because That's what the global pandemic has given us. It's given us an opportunity to stop and realise that we weren't planning for the future. So in terms of designing a national population plan, I think it's going to take all actors. It absolutely needs government's involvement, but it needs regional communities' involvement as well. And it needs the private sector. It needs the private sector to tell us, where are your future investments? Where do you want, what locations do you want to continue to grow from? So we get a really holistic overlay that has the kind of geographical context, and we can plan for that. Because right now we know that we have never had a correct population projection. And that's not a criticism, it's hard to do. But we can learn from the past and recognise that, we need to project a lot higher than we have been, because we've got 1 in 5 city dwellers that don't want to live in the city anymore. So what are we doing to plan for that?
Okay, thank you. Our first question is from Simon Gross from Canberra IQ.
Thanks for your speech. I want to drill down to aviation. It's a wide brown land, and one of the supports for people living in regional Australia is regional aviation. Now, I understand that in the budget the government withdrew funding for security services at regional airports, and I understand that Rex is planning to stop flying to Whyalla and things like that. How do you respond to that? Do you think that the airlines could afford to cover the cost of these services, or and put it on to customers, or would you be lobbying the government to change their view?
Thank you. Great question. Look, aviation is a critical dimension to livability. The connectivity that regional community needs is so vital. So the fact that funding's been cut is disappointing. Certainly disappointing for those regional communities who will feel it the most. So of course I'm going to answer the question with, I want to see more investment in aviation, and we're going to need to find a way to do that, because it's really competitive. What the report shows that I've launched today is that regions are competing with one another for talent. Therefore, it doesn't become a choice about what job I want. It becomes a choice about where do I want to live. And people want to live where they love. And part of that dimension is having airport connectivity. Maybe not in your town, but within reach. So this is a really important part of hard infrastructure, but it has strong links to soft.
Could you just explain more fully what you mean by soft infrastructure?
It's human capital. It's the dimension of a social fabric that makes up the community. So it's things like our healthcare, our community services, our childcare. That's what we refer to when we talk about soft infrastructure.
Okay, so while I've got you on that, can we just go to education? So if you talk about schools, basically the academic outcomes of kids from regional and rural Australia, the further away from a big city you get, the worse those educational outcomes become. For Year 9 boys, literacy, numeracy, kind of shocking levels. And then we move on to Year 12 retention, and we look at participation in universities. The regions struggle on all sorts of levels with education. There's obviously no simple solution, but what is your thinking about that in terms of, because if someone leaves to go to university, they're likely not to come back. And with all due respect, I don't think the regional university centre, whatever they're called, are particularly the answer. Could we just go to education, please?
Yeah, good question. The regional universities are really plugging a gap. And so to your question, it's a gap that shouldn't be there. We've had underinvestment in our vet sector. In fact, we've got vacant buildings in regional Australia. So we need to make sure that we can reinvest, and I know there's a strong plan in place, but it's going to take time. Look, it's really disappointing, and I was a regional kid. I was really happy growing up in Deniliquin, going to my local Denny High School. In fact, the day that I was fortunate enough to receive a scholarship, because it's the only way I would have been able to afford to go to boarding school, I sat in the car with my mother and cried because my sense of place and connection with my community was so strong. But I'm 20 plus years down the track and I can see the benefit of the experience that I was given by seeing the best of both worlds. And we do know that regional kids go away. I see it all the time. But many, many return, and there'd be many in this room who've returned. But that's not enough. We need to see more of an education mix. And again, to talk about livability, that notion of competition and where people want to live. They're looking at aviation, they're looking at education. Take Orange as an example. It's a community that's grown so rapidly because it's got a really strong mix of public and private education. You need to offer that in regional communities because people want choice. And I mean, I think we've got friends from our regional universities network here. They're doing a great job. There's Alec. Hello, Alec. We love our regional universities. Not only are they educating some of the brightest people in this country, but again, to my point of livability, universities provide much, much more than education. They bring in a young and vital workforce who will take up some of the jobs that we've talked about today in sales assistance, in hospitality. They will play a really important part. And we know, and Alec will love that I call this out, that 70% of students who study in regional Australia will go on to live and work in our regions. That is a sensational result. So we've got to learn from that. We need to reinvest in our regional universities and understand that they're playing a really vital role in supporting the potential of this country.
Thank you. Our next question is from Rachel Baxter from Channel 7.
Thank you for your speech. There was a big push a few years ago for decentralising government agencies to regional towns. The APVMA was moved from Canberra to Armidale, but almost the entire team quit, including the CEO. What went wrong there, and is there still a space for decentralisation moving forward with this plan that you talk of?
Yeah. Oh, what went wrong? You know, what we're talking about here, what we're talking about today is that Australians want choice. You can't force people, and we don't think you need to, because regional Australia is a beautiful place to live and raise a family and have a career. I've spent my career trying to get into a place where I can be in a role that will enable me to work from regional Australia, and I'm there, finally. But it took COVID to change that, sadly. It shouldn't have taken a global pandemic, but it did. Australia is behind other nations in consideration of flexible and remote work. You know, we've been behind the 8 ball here, and we're playing catch up. So yes, you know, we're not saying decentralisation doesn't have a place. You know, I think it does, but the settings have to be right. You can't force people.
Thank you.
Our next question is from Tim Shaw. He's a director of the Press Club.
Oh, thank you, Julie. And Liz, thank you so much for this very timely speech. You may have noted the Albanese government is 1 year old. Last Sunday, there was a change in government in the largest state economy in New South Wales. Both were Conservative governments that were replaced. Who on the hill up there is your friend? Because...
It's a good loaded question. Thank you, Tim.
It's my job.
Well,
So on that point of who your friend is on the hill, I note that the member for Moncrieff, Angie Bell, from the Gold Coast is here. Isn't this what this report is all about?
yeah.
That The scope that the report and your board has put together is a guideline for the future for state and federal governments to be able to, A, attract more foreign investment in secondary manufacturing into regional areas. And I'll cite the Bushmaster, which has been sent up to Ukraine to protect the lives of those fighting that illegal war. 78 more Bushmasters will be built in Bendigo, a regional city in Victoria. Where are the business cases that the RAI and others can bring to the conversation that show why the investment's critical, and with that then the health, the education, the childcare workers that will be part of that overall economic input?
Thanks, Tim. There's about 3 or 4 questions in your question. Let me start with your first question, the easy one.
Up there.
Who are my friends? Well, I'm really pleased to see a number and work with a number of great friends on the Hill. And we've got Amy in the audience, who's a key advisor to Minister Christine McBain, Minister for Regional Development and Local Government, a minister who really, in our view, truly gets this work. You know, as a regional minister, she brings that unique mindset that I've been referring to today, as does Minister Catherine King, who's obviously the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development. So Catherine's been a great supporter of the Institute. But I think probably, you know, we were talking about this earlier, Tim, and, you know, if I had a muse on the Hill, it would be the Treasurer. I think, you know, I've referred to him in my address today. I think he's leading some pretty exciting reform. I think he recognises that we are ailing in our productivity aspirations, and there's a lot that regional Australia can do to try to assist. And that's really important. And the other piece that we really commend in the work, and I know it's early, they're, as you say, 1 year in, we are really interested in what a wellbeing budget looks like. Because when you start to look at the factors that I've talked through today and the gaps that we see in our soft infrastructure, you know, a wellbeing budget is going to start to close some of those gaps. And it will mean more to regional Australia than it does to metro. And that would be a welcome change. To some of your other questions, you're going to bring me back to manufacturing. I didn't know that story about the Bushmasters in Bendigo, but Robert here from the Bendigo and Adelaide Bank, I'm sure knows it well. I think that's incredibly exciting that manufacturing is happening in Bendigo, and I want to see more of it. I think regional Australia is really well placed to step up and fill Australia's manufacturing needs. And there are, you know, great examples. I mean, I draw on Ballarat and Mars, which is one of Australia's largest manufacturers. The connections there that Ballarat and the Federation University have with IBM. It really, what they're doing there in Ballarat is growing from within. It's a great example of connecting our young, talented, well-educated youth to get them into these jobs that are, you know, incredible career opportunities. These are really well-paid graduate positions. And when I caught up with Mars, they said to me they are inundated with you know, our graduates wanting to take one of those places, and there's not enough. They're few and far between. So I think that's really encouraging that our youth want to take those opportunities in the regions.
And business cases? Do you see important development of business cases like the Bushmaster that can become an attraction to local and international investors?
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, whilst we haven't at the Institute done any direct work on those business cases, I think it might be something we need to look at and talk about. So thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Just while we're talking about Friends on the Hill, Catherine King has announced a review of infrastructure. I think it's $179 billion, correct me if I'm wrong. But that will have an impact on regional Victoria, regional Australia in terms of the size of the projects. I just looked to the Inland Rail. It was championed by Barnaby Joyce. Whether it was a good thing or a rational thing or a reasonable thing is, open to question. So what do you make of this review, and are you behind it? Are you supportive of it, or are you concerned that it might actually have a negative impact on infrastructure in regional Australia?
Good question. So, I mean, look, it's not for me to comment on what projects are going to be funded and what aren't. I know that Catherine King has seen it as vitally important to get under the hood here and have a look at the business case of each of these infrastructure projects. And there's an enormous amount of money on the table. So it is worthy of taking our time and giving due consideration. So I think, that's wise, and that is indeed her choice to make as the minister. But I think when it comes to infrastructure, what I've talked about today is that we just want to see much more investment in that soft infrastructure. We want to see more childcare centres, more schools, more hospitals. We want to see those services that are missing right now.
They're not very good for press conferences and announceables, though.
They should be.
Big infrastructure bills, are great. People in hard hats and high-vis gear are always great for getting a few TV cameras out. And, soft infrastructure doesn't have a great political sell.
We can work on that, I think.
Our next question is from Maurice Riley, the CEO of the Press Club.
Thanks for coming here today, Liz. I have half as many questions as my colleague Tim Shaw. I have two questions, and I'll ask them one at a time, right? To give you to make this fair. Housing is this critical issue. There seems to be a mantra that private enterprise should try and fix this problem. But I looked at yesterday's Victorian state budget, and land tax has just gone up dramatically. It seems to me that you've got builders who are going to the wall. The risks now to build large-scale housing infrastructure is becoming a much more risky proposition. Financing the whole bit, right? It might be a bit of a back to the future type solution where, councils hold the land. Maybe council should be investing in a public works department. State government should be investing in works, because that's going to be the quickest way to fix this problem. Like, for example, if you build a hospital, we don't build nurses' quarters anymore or medical quarters anymore. There seems to me the answer could well be, a back to the future type approach, because I don't see the evidence for private enterprise picking up the slack.
Thanks, Maurice. I think, as I mentioned, the housing really, really is a vexing issue, and unfortunately there isn't, a silver bullet. I know you had a session here last week on housing and regional housing in particular with Helen Haynes. And, I just call out Helen's work because she's pushing hard at the moment to see a regional housing infrastructure fund get up. And, I think she's pushing, I think it's $2 billion. And what's exciting about that is that it's targeted at regional Australia, because a lot of the policies that we're seeing coming out from the government at the moment, we commend the enormous amount of work that is happening right now. There is a lot. There's a lot on the table in the Housing Australia Fund, but it's not targeted enough. So we can't get under the hood and see how many of those houses are going to be in regional Australia, because numbers matter, and we need to see what that will look like in relation to filling these jobs, because the greatest barrier we have right now is housing in filling these jobs. So, there is a lot on the table, and I think, to talk more about housing. The Institute's done a lot of work with several reports in housing called Building the Good Life. And we could see that in the decade to 2020, population growth was outpacing construction and approvals. So again, it's to that point that you have to look at the data. That's what we do at the Institute. You have to say, okay, we had more people than we had houses. This was a sleeping giant. And then we had a global pandemic. And now we are where we are as a consequence of that. So how might we learn from that? So other policies that are coming through, and the regional first home buyers grant, again, that's something the Institute called for. We welcome that, but we didn't want it to be a blanket policy. We wanted it to be targeted to the regional areas that needed that investment the most. Because if you apply first home buyer grants to some of our regional communities that have already experienced enormous growth, then you only create a bigger problem. So it's how you get more targeted. And this is our message. I sound like a broken record.
Do you have a second?
Yeah, on indulgence.
Yes, because you are the Chief Executive.
Yeah. Skills recognition. You know, the other one you talked about in your speech was doctors in particular, and no doubt a whole array of medical professionals. There are certain organisations that are very rigid about recognising immigrants who have got great skills. You know, I'll probably get in trouble with this, but the AMA comes to mind, right? So, and they're coming here in a few weeks, so we'll talk to them about that. But nonetheless, there is a crisis, and there are bodies in that skill recognition area, and probably engineers and dental people, you know, whose skills are certainly at a high level, but maybe not at the peak Australian level. Do you think there's a case, the RI can make a case for, at least in this emergency situation, you know, progressing the recognition of those skills of some very talented people?
Absolutely, Morris. I wouldn't disagree with you. Anything that we can do to fast track skills recognition in relation to our international migrants, it's absolutely vital. Because, you know, as we relaunched this report this morning, the Big Skills Challenge, the question that I received this morning on RN was, what is the solution? What is the short-term fix? You know, there's long-term fixes and there's short-term fixes. And one of the shorter-term fixes is migration. So we have to enable that fast tracking of skills recognition and make sure that those skills are taking up the opportunities in regional Australia. We've got countless examples, and obviously Anil and Raju are here today, of that working. So it's not just in relation to the healthcare sector, medical practitioners that I've, you know, top of the list in our top 4 occupations by groupings. It is the engineers and the pharmacists. It's the electricians, it's the trades that we need to build the infrastructure that we're investing in.
Don't forget chefs, I've got a couple of jobs.
Oh, chefs, really important.
Our next question is from Tim Lester from NRPC.
Thank you very much. Yes, Tim Lester, I'm the Vice President of the National Rural Press Club, and on behalf of our President, Kath Sullivan, who passes her apologies, and our membership, thank you so much for bringing this topic to the national table. It's just so important. The piece that so in your presentation there was a lot of talk about the skills and regions as great places to live and work, and they absolutely are, completely agree. The piece that I haven't heard is about resources, the actual sources of the wealth. So in my day job I work with the forest industry. Yesterday we had the Victorian government essentially given industry 6 months to shut down. So I'm wondering what your reflection is on the role of our productive industries, agriculture, fisheries and forestry, as well as others in the regions, as base sources of wealth that then support regional Australia, that provide carbon solutions, climate solutions, economic solutions, environmental solutions, and yet almost at the stroke of a pen, and it's not the first time we've seen it, governments, for whatever reason, have listened to selective science or an emotive picture or a 7:30 report and go, hang on now, this is not for us anymore.
Great question. Thank you. There's a lot in that. I think it's important that I say, as the Institute, we haven't focused deeply on those sectors such as agriculture and forestry because there are other exceptional peak body organisations that do that wonderful representative work and we work with them. But in saying that, what you've talked about there, these are the sectors that underpin regional Australia. So they are vital, and the knee-jerk decision that I haven't yet caught up with, I have to admit. I haven't got through yesterday's budget as yet, too focused on today. That's problematic. We need to be ensuring that they're receiving any decisions based upon, good information. And we know that those sectors, they're evolving. The technology advancement that's coming through forestry and agriculture, it's part of our future. So that's what I'd say.
And we can talk about some of those other issues. Thank you.
Great.
Our final question is from Simon Gross.
Okay, I'm worried that your stats are a bit skewed by definitional bias.
Oh dear.
Your top 5 LGAs by net migration to regional Australia: Sunshine Coast, Gold Coast, Greater Geelong, Fraser Coast, Bundaberg. Now, last time I looked at a picture of the Gold Coast, the members here, it's a bit different to the picture of the landscape of Barcaldine, say, or Wilcannia, as Geelong and Wilcannia. So, if you factor out these urbanised regions, what do your stats look like? Do you do that?
Thank you, and I knew this question would come.
Oh, good.
So the answer is we don't factor it out because we're representative of regional Australia. And
But surely for your own understanding of what's going on, you're better off to know that.
I'm going to offer that recommendation to my chief economist, who sadly couldn't be with us today.
Okay.
However, our definition of regional Australia is anywhere outside of our capital cities.
Okay.
So it is inclusive, and I think it's helpful for it to be included. But what is important is that we have to recognise that there is great variances, as you've pointed out, between our regional cities and our smaller rural and remote communities like where I grew up in Deniliquin. So we're very aware of the differences and the diversity, and I think something that I talk about regularly is that regional Australia is far from a homogenous place, which is why the understanding of targeted and place-based policy development is so vital.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Liz, for your time today, and I would like to offer you a golden membership to the National Press Club. Please join me in thanking Liz Ritchie. That was a tough last question.